Hi, this is Lainey Cameron, and I'm here with my co-host Paulette Stout, and this is our second episode on the best of book marketing. And today's episode is kind of fun and special because we're going to talk about how to market your books after release day, right? We all read lots of checklists that say, here's all the things to do to release your book and how to market your book. And then we get to day two, right? The book came out, and a lot of authors give me feedback that they're like, well, what now? What do I do now? Am I done? How do I market this thing now it's out in the world? And so we thought this was a big topic to address. And excitingly, we've got a special guest who's going to join us. We'll introduce her in a few minutes, but I think this is going to be such a great conversation.
I know. I just love our guest. It's going to be fantastic. So
And
update, Lainey. What is new for you? Lainey, what you got going on?
So sorry about that. I had a little glitch there. Oh my goodness, since we last talked in our first episode, my life has been an SHIT show. I will be honest with you. It's not been a fun last month. So since we last talked in our first episode, and I'll tell you some good stuff at the end of this, but let's see. My mom fell and broke her shoulder. The same weekend, my stepdad fell and broke his knee. We canceled our trip to Europe so we could care for them. My mom's floors fell apart in her house, and the entire house floors need replaced before we can sell it. And I had a monster Crohn's flare-up, and I've been in the ER once or twice over the last month. So what a mess it has been. It's not been fun. I've been super, super sick, which is really frustrating because you don't own all of your own productivity when you're in a scenario where you've got a flare-up and you're sick. But two really cool things have happened during that time. The first is we got phenomenal feedback on the first episode that we did for the best of book marketing. I think I personally had 4 different debut authors email or direct message me to tell me how helpful it was to them. Specifically, I think it was your bakery analogy. I mean, I know you didn't invent it, but you talked about an existing analogy of the bakery. But the bakery and the idea that like not everything depends on the moment of your first book coming out, right? Like you're building a career over time and what that means. And so if you haven't listened to the episode, it's well worth going back and listening to our first episode. But we got such great feedback. I even had one author reach out to me to have me help them with marketing as a result of that episode. And so super, super excited. And then the second thing is my own debut, which came out 4 years ago now, next month, won its 15th award. It was selected for the shortlist and then for the finalist as a finalist in the Hawthorne Book Awards, which is a fairly prestigious book award. So that was a lovely little kick 4 years later to have that happen. So good things in among all the garbage. So what about you, Paulette? I believe I saw several book awards, not just one, but several for your latest.
Well, yeah. Well, yesterday was a big day. I found out that I won the women's fiction category for the National Indie Excellence Awards. That was really exciting. Everyone was super engaged online yesterday. Thank you so much to everyone who reached out with emails and texts and comments. It just was feeling the love yesterday. You're feeling the love. And yes, and also just really in the throes of finishing my second edit on my next work in progress, What We Give Away, which comes out in February 2025. That goes to the editor next week. It's always like you feel the editor so far away and then it's like on you. So I'm just kind of cramming to get it done. And I'm super excited to have located a sensitivity reader for this. This has been so hard. The book touches on disordered eating and body size, and it's been a little bit challenging getting someone to read it, but I reached out to the Massachusetts Eating Disorder Association and they are going to be helping me. So I'm super excited to get like a input from someone on the draft at a point where I can always just, make things better. And I, running some new Facebook ads, they're paying for themselves, which is always like a miracle. So so lots of stuff going on and all good stuff.
And we said one thing we'd mention at the beginning, because we've had this question from people that authors we're connected to and viewers. We've been asked about podcast. We've been asked about conferences.
There for a minute.
My earpods fell out. Go figure. I still haven't got the sizing right. We've been asked about conferences, and is there an opportunity to see us or meet us anywhere through the rest of the year? And so I just wanted to mention, in among all my reshuffling of my plans, which has been a lot of reshuffling, I was able to carve out time that I will be at the Women's Fiction Writers Association retreat in Albuquerque at the beginning of September. If anyone is considering that one, it's going to be amazing. Angela Ackerman is going to be She's the person behind the Emotions Thesaurus, the Emotional Wound Thesaurus, really great series of books for writers. She's going to be giving the sessions. Yeah, I love these books. Like, oh my God, the Emotions Thesaurus, the Negative Trait Thesaurus,
no, if you don't have
the Character Trait Thesaurus, the Vocations Thesaurus. They're phenomenal.
Yeah.
We'll put the link in the page for the podcast here in the episode page. But so she's going to be the speaker there now. Change of plans. It's the first week of September. I am going to be there. And then I'm also going to Author Nation, which is the new version of what used to be called the 20 Books Conference in Las Vegas. And that's at the beginning of November. And I know, Paulette, you went to some conferences early in the year. Nothing committed through the end of the year yet, right?
Right now, with the change in speaker for Albuquerque, like I'm fizzing and I want to go. So I'll see. I just went back to work full time. So I really, I have a lot on my plate right now. So if I can make it happen, I will make it happen. But I hope to get to Albuquerque, but I'm not for sure just yet. So great. So that is our intro section for today. And we're super excited to introduce our amazing guest, which is Paulette Kennedy. Paulette Kennedy is the best-selling author of The Witch of Tin Mountain, The Devil and Mrs. Davenport, which is ridiculously phenomenal, y'all. The Parting of the Veil, which received the prestigious HNS Review Editor's Choice Award. Paulette began her lifelong obsession with the Gothic, introduced her to the Brontes as a teenager, and her affinity for fog-covered landscapes and haunted heroines only grew, inspiring her to become a writer. Originally from the Missouri Ozarks, she now lives with her family and a menagerie of rescue pets in sunny Southern California. Welcome, Paulette, and good to have you.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. Thanks, ladies.
So are you going to any conferences? Sorry, I was going to ask Paulette while we have her. Do you go? Are there any good historical fiction conferences that you go to?
Yes. HNS North America is every other year here in the States. And so I went last year and I'm going next year. It'll be in Vegas next year. So that's the next big conference I have coming up. I just finished Right Hive, their online conference last weekend. So I was a panelist for that one, but I don't have any big conferences coming up until next year.
Cool. Well, let's get into our conversation here because we're going to talk about this question of how do you market the books after the launch? And we kind of split it into topics to organize ourselves a little bit here. And I think the first topic that we had that you had suggested, oh, by the way, because we have two Paulettes, in case you didn't notice on this episode, we have Paulette Kennedy and Paulette Stout, which is entirely confusing. I'm going to refer to Paulette Stout just for this episode as Let, and Paulette Kennedy as Paulette, just so we don't confuse the heck out of ourselves. Isn't it fun to have two Paulettes at once? So let's get into our first topic, which Let had suggested that we talk first about book packaging, because this is one of those things that you don't know it until you get out there and learn. And then you can make tweaks, but it's hard to get it all right up front, I think. Well, you can disagree with me, but I think it's hard. And so we're going to start with this topic of book packaging. And maybe do you want to lead us off here?
Yeah, sure. I think that when it comes to book marketing, sometimes people forget about the importance of how your book is presented to the marketplace, and when you sending people to your retailer page, to your website, whatever, if your book packaging is off, you're basically just throwing your money down the sewer because you're sending people to a place that kind of isn't ready for prime time. If your book cover is wrong, if your book description is, not what it should be, even if your pricing is maybe out of line with what the marketplace is looking for, it's just, you have to get those foundational elements right before you go. I don't know, Paulette, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I totally agree. Your cover design, all of your marketing, fonts on your cover are so important. People being able to see your name and the book title on a thumbprint size, because if they're just glancing through Amazon or whatnot and the image is small, if your title and your author name doesn't stand out, sometimes they can't tell what the book is even about or who wrote it. So those are all very important things.
And
I noticed, Paulette,
Oh, I was just going to say, sometimes you can't tell until you run ads and do other things that it's not performing the way you thought it would, right? And so I know you had some experience with your first two books in the series where, they kind of got a little miscategorized as romance, and then you had some challenges with the covers as a result. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but like those are things you couldn't really know until your book was in the world, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, and also, how your book presents, and if it's in a series or if it's standalones. I know, Paulette, your books, I think they're standalones, right? So that,
Mhm.
and your book covers are very different from each other. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the work that you've done to kind of create a cohesive author platform, but with different like standalone titles.
Sure. Well, I'm traditionally published by Lake Union Publishing, so they do a lot of my marketing as far as like my cover design. Although I do have a lot of input there, which is really great, and I love having all of that involvement from the beginning with the title and everything. Although with Parting the Veil, the title changed significantly from what I originally pitched the book. So I always kind of defer to the marketing team in my area of publishing, just because I feel like they know what they're doing more than I do. But with each book, I would say my brand is there's always a little bit of romance in all of my books. They're not romances, they're not category romances, but there's always a romantic subplot. They're all gothic. They're all very atmospheric, and there are similar themes in all of my books, which help to unify everything, even though each one stands alone. So there are themes of loss, grief, found family, of sisterhood. Sisterhood's a big one, and especially with my fourth book that's coming out next year. It's a huge theme in that one. And so there are unifying themes throughout all three books that kind of work to give me a brand, I would say. And that's kind of what I look at whenever I'm starting to think about what I'm going to pitch next, is how does it fit in with the rest of my catalog?
Yeah, and I think that's so important because I think that when sometimes people like they finish a book and they go to market it, there's a lot of thinking that has to happen earlier in. Like it has to happen when you're writing. How does this fit into my catalog of books? How does this fit into the marketplace? How does this relate to what the types of stories that people are looking for in the genre I write? So there's a lot of that strategic thinking that should happen a little earlier in the process before you just kind of like, okay, my book's done. Now I'm gonna go market it.
But we're talking about what you can do after the book comes out, and I know that you in particular, since your first book came out, I believe you've changed the cover multiple times. I believe you've changed the blurb, the book description, more than once, I think. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and why it was after the launch as opposed to before, getting everything 100% right before the first book came out?
Right. Because I think it's so much of it is about the data you have. You're making some assumptions about what readers want, what the marketplace is looking for before you launch. And then when you get out, that's when you can see how is the book resonating, what are the reviews saying, what are what are the categories that you're showing up with, because Amazon is going to look at the people who buy your book and don't, and they're going to kind of put you where they think you have a chance of success. So all those things kind of triangulate. You can see, can I make, can I update the beginning? Maybe you get a book award or you get a nice blurb from someone and you want to add that in to create some social validation. So there's little things. I'm always tweaking my book descriptions. Like I'm in there a lot. Like I don't change my categories and keywords often, but book descriptions, I just changed it last week again because I had a little quote at the top. Notice the sales dipped just a teeny bit, and I changed it back to something else, and then the sales went back up. So like you can test and measure, and that's something that happens after launch. So that's, I think, a big reason why all of these little refinements, especially like on the indie side, can happen post-launch. I'm not sure how that works for you post-launch, Paulette.
Yeah, I'm kind of limited on what I can do as far as like changing my meta tags and my book description and stuff. That's more of my publisher's marketing team. That's their area. But definitely blurbs. I'm very active about seeking out blurbs from other authors. And I was really lucky with The Devil and Mrs. Davenport. Most people just volunteered blurbs for me because I had blurbed them, and I built relationships, and that's something I definitely want to talk about today, is how important it is to build connections and relationships in this industry, not necessarily as part of your marketing strategy, although it helps. But yeah, I just really try to always be looking forward for myself as a traditionally published author about I'm looking at the market and what's popular, and you can kind of angle how you approach your marketing with what the marketing, like right now, romantasy is really, really trending. So like for my next book, I'm going to be pushing kind of that there is a little bit of a romantic fantasy element to my next book, even though it's not categorically a romantic fantasy. So there are ways that you can kind of examine the market and see how your book might resonate with what is trending, and target your marketing in accordance.
And I'd love to add a couple of words about what Paulette was saying about Amazon categories, etc. Some context for the authors who may be a little newer to this and don't have the background here. So when you put your book up on Amazon, let's for a second talk about an indie author, because as an indie author, you have complete control over this. And like Paulette is saying, if you're with a big publisher, some of this is done by your publisher and you may not be controlling it. But so let me just take the indie author example. Okay. So when you put your book up on Amazon, you are choosing keywords, and you are choosing categories to put your book in. You actually get 3 on the ebook side and 3 on the book side. And you're also putting a book description or blurb up there. Ultimately, you can fill out your editorial section too. And the reason all of these things matter, in particular, your categories and keywords, Amazon uses those to decide who to put the book in front of. So if you say that you're in a particular category, Amazon hopefully is going to show the book to people who have said they like that category. Now, if you're a reader, you're going, what do you mean I said I like that category? Well, the way you told Amazon you like that category is you bought books in that category in the past, and you clicked on books in that category in the past. Okay, so Amazon knows that Lainey Cameron loves to read romantasy, let's say. Okay, very smart. They got a big data engine. They know that I love that. They even know that I like romantasy books with, oh, give me an example, Paulette. Werewolves in them? Are there werewolves in them?
Yeah,
werewolves type, right? Okay.
All sorts
so
of
they
things.
know that I like that. Yeah, exactly. They know that I like shapeshifters, okay? And so now Paulette, in her keywords for her book, has put that her book has shapeshifters in it, and it's a romantasy book in the categorization. And so Amazon is hopefully going to show that to me as a reader. Now, if it turns out that Paulette's book doesn't actually have a good description that matches that, and the reader, when they are presented that book, they don't click through and they don't buy it, then what happens is Amazon goes, ooh, this book is not good for those readers. I won't show it to people anymore. And then when we're talking about the algorithm, that's what we mean, is the algorithm is smart enough to go, oh, look, Paulette said this book was this. And when I showed it to a reader in that category, they clicked through and they bought it. So let's do that more because I'll get more sales as Amazon, right? So that's how categories and keywords play in. You want the right ones that when you're in that category, the reader actually does click through and buy. Because if you put yourself in a category that it might be a brilliant selling category, but nobody's buying your book because it doesn't really fit, you've done yourself a huge disservice. And some of these things are hard to know without data, right? Before your book comes out, you can take your best educated guess of what category it should be in, and hopefully the readers in that category will like it. But this is what Let was saying. Until you can actually, for example, run an ad and see whether that actually turns to be true, you don't know for sure. You're just making your best educated guess. And then once your book is out, now you have real data, and you can see that your sales go up or down based on putting it in a particular category, based on particular keywords. And so it's not quite that like cut and dry that you can actually go and see like this keyword led to this sale, but you can change things, and then you can look at the results of the change on your sales and your results. So that's what Let was talking about there, is that's why those things matter, and you can do things after the book is out. And yes,
Right.
this totally changes by publishing model. This is one of those things that's
It
very different.
does. And I'm sorry to belabor this, but if you think of a book, you go to market, you think it's going to appeal to a certain group of readers, and then you find that maybe those readers aren't responding as well, but this other group of readers is really stepping up, then you could potentially pivot kind of how you're describing the book. You can change some of the categories, you can change the keywords, you can change the book description, you can, even change the your visuals on social or whatever, how you're describing it in your social posts and your advertising you run, and to try to get the right people. So it's all about just trying to get the right people.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about advertising. I will make sure we come back on Paulette's concept of like community, because it's something Paulette and I are very passionate about. But let's talk first about mindset, because I know this is one that you said, let's make sure we talk about mindset. And this idea, we talked about it in the first podcast episode of taking a long-term view. Do you want to lead us off again, Paulette? And then Let, and then we'll ask Paulette to add her thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the important part of here is to remember, this whole episode is about what do you do after book launch? And, book launch is a very limited amount of time depending on how you view it, but, within a few months or weeks or whatever. And the life of the book, it'll live forever. So if you kind of get all wound around the axle because your book isn't just launching really stratospherically in the first few days after launch, and you're checking your data, or you're, seeing what the response is, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. And that's you want to set yourself up to have a sustainable author career. I think most people probably listening to this podcast would have, a little bit, like, they're not just gonna write one book, they're gonna write multiple books. So I love to know, Paulette, what you think about, how you prepare yourself for that initial flurry around launch. And then, sometimes people get a little sad, they get a little deflated, this post-launch blues. How do you handle all that?
Oh, this is a topic that I'm passionate about too, because my debut, it did okay, but it was a slow burn. When my second book launched, it did really well because of some advertising that my publisher did, and it boosted my debut. My debut ended up outselling what it did at launch because of my second book. So my front list sold my back list, and it's continuing to do so. And that's what I always tell newer authors who are debuting. It's like, because that day after Christmas feeling happens, after launch sometimes. And you're like, oh, I was really hoping it would do better. But you're building something. You're building your list, you're building your readership, you're learning how to target your marketing to your readers. And all of that comes with time, and it comes with patience too. You have to be patient about it, because some people do break out big with their first book, but the majority of us don't. The majority of us, one of my friends told me, usually book 4 tends to be the one where your readership really starts to show up for you and carry you with your publishing career to where they'll buy anything that you write after that. And so I think that is something to keep in mind whenever you have that day after Christmas or that letdown after launch. Is like, I'm building something. It might take me a couple more books. It might take me a couple more years to get there, but I will.
I think that the day after Christmas analogy is actually really good. I mean, I think of it as January, right? Like you have all this lead up to the holiday season, and you've got, like, the Christmas and the New Year party and all the parties and the things. And then you get to like January 3rd, and the weather is horrible, and nobody's going out anymore. And we're all broke because we spent all our money on Christmas presents or holiday presents of some type. And it's like the worst time, right? And like, you're just like, oh God. And now we're going to do New Year's resolutions. It's like, ugh. And so I do think it's a little similar, that there's so much build up to that launch day. And then it's January 3rd, and you're like, well, not only nothing's happening anymore, but also the weather's horrible. And so now what?
Yes.
And so it's a real known thing. For those of you who haven't yet brought out your first book, this post-launch slump is a real thing that many authors have been through. And I always, for the people in my marketing program, I try to warn them just so that they don't like get hit sideways by it because they didn't see it coming. So sometimes just knowledge of like that happens to many / most authors is like helpful just to know that. Like, prepare for it. Like, book yourself a spa day a few days after you launch so that you can go, have some things on your calendar to do that are not sitting looking at your computer screen and looking at your Amazon ranking. So
one thing that's super important that, just quickly, because Paulette said something really important, that her first book sold better after her second book. So when my second book came out, thematically, I think it maybe wasn't 100% with the market. It's a great book and people love it, but it's not something maybe they would like run out to choose potentially. But now that the third book is out and that is responding well from advertising, I'm getting, like Paulette said, the read through to the first and second book based on the advertising, that people read the third one, they go back and read the other one. So it's again back to that long-term view. Don't despair if your books aren't all seller or they don't respond as well to advertising. My book 2 didn't respond as well to advertising as my book 3, and it may just happen that way, but it doesn't mean that all is lost for your book. It's kind of just sit back down to the keyboard and keep writing. And
Paulette, I know you wanted to talk about community, and like I said, we feel very passionately about that. That's part of why we're doing this podcast, is to help other authors. Why don't you go there right now? I think that's a really important topic.
Well, building community, it started a long time ago for me. Like, way back in 2016, whenever I first started getting back into my writing, being a major focus for me. I started getting involved on Twitter with the writing community and such. And so I built a lot of friendships back then, and I still have most of those friends. And we're all in different places right now in our publishing career, but we've all maintained that friendship. And then, as my first book published, authors who blurbed me became friends, and it just kept growing. And so there's like that is author focused, right? So you meet others and you gain companionship that way, and colleagues who will support you and you support them, and that's huge. It really is worth the time and effort that you spend to do so. And then there's building community with your readers and learning how to communicate with your readers, and social media is a big part of that. But also like your newsletter, that's a huge way that I communicate with my readers, and building that kind of community. Like there are things in my newsletter that only my subscribers ever read about or know about or gain access to. And I think that makes it a little bit more special. And so just taking the time like every day just to kind of check in with your community and see how everybody's doing it, and helping people feel seen, helping people feel noticed, and being there for your friends, and they'll be there for you. It really does work out that way, and it's beautiful. That's what carried the launch of my third book. I can tell you that 100% was the author community and my readers showing up for me, because I did have a publicist for that book, and she got me a lot of really great placements. But honestly, most of the really great placements that I got came from just me having built those relationships, like with podcast hosts and such, who really pushed and say, hey, let's talk about your book. Let's get you scheduled for the show. And because I had been supportive and I'd showed up for them in the past. And so my publicist was absolutely wonderful. She got me so many great placements, and I'm very grateful. But like there's something to be said with just that organic growth that you get by just continuing to show up for people.
Absolutely. Most of my appearances, like I was just on a site last week and one the week before, 4 years after my book came out. And it's because other authors say, oh, you should talk to Lainey. She'd have something to say on that topic. And that's how I end up. Like I don't have a publicist. I've never had a publicist. And yet I get invited to things because I'm referred by other authors. So I think that's a really good example. And, why am I being referred by other authors? Because I've run a podcast for other authors called The Best of Women's Fiction, because I do everything I can to uplift and support other authors. For anyone who doesn't know this, I run a writer support group on Thursday nights on Zoom every Thursday night. We're on hiatus over the summer. We'll be back in September. I'll put the information in the notes if you'd like to join us. Beautiful way to connect with other writers every Thursday night. Paulette has been a part of that for a long time. And that's actually how we know each other mostly, right? We met at the WFWA event in Albuquerque, and then we knew each other through this online group. And so 100% agree with everything you said, Paulette Kennedy.
Thank you.
So let's see. I think we're going to switch now to our little segment in the show where we have our sponsored segment, which isn't actually a sponsored segment. So last month, we talked about the fact that Paulette Stout and I both offer marketing services for authors. Paulette does indie author consulting. If you're indie publishing your book and you need a hand just with the walking through of how to do it, she has very limited time right now. We said this last month because she has a full-time job. And I have a program for authors called 12 Weeks to Book Launch Success, where I walk you through everything you need to successfully launch your book over 12 weeks. And by the end of that, you have a full marketing plan. But we wanted to point out today that we are open to having a sponsor for the podcast. It would have to be someone who offers relevant services or products to writers. And it would have to be someone that we feel comfortable is someone we would recommend, someone or a team or an organization that we would recommend. We're not going to bring on a sponsor. Well, actually, Paulette, let's tell them what we got. We got an email from cattshirts.com who wanted us to let them sponsor with cat-themed t-shirts. And we're like, I don't think so. So we were not doing cat t-shirts. But if you have a service for writers, whether it's editing, whether it's something around marketing books. We are building an audience here. We're only in our second episode, and you have a chance to get in on the ground floor as a sponsor, which means you'll show up in all the early episodes when people go and listen through our back catalog. So, and we're not going to charge you very much money right now because we're just new and starting. So it's actually a really amazing opportunity that I hope someone is going to take us up on. But like I said, we're going to be cautious about who it is. We're not going to have anyone on the podcast that we don't believe in, that we don't trust. That's one of the guidelines that Paulette and I set for ourselves as co-hosts. So just to say that, and also, if you're looking for a place that you can sponsor to get the word out about your book, and it's in particular relevant to women, the Women Writers, Women's Books Facebook page and site is one of the places where we actually broadcast this with the help of Barbara Boss. And I know I have done a sponsorship of that site in the past. I know Paulette has. Great awareness opportunity if you're looking for a way to do that. And we'll put the link again in the show notes. And thank you to Barbara Boss for broadcasting us there. We really appreciate it. An extra way to get out to writers and help them. So that's it. That's the extent of our podcast sponsored segment. Let's get back to our topics and get real tactical now. I think we want to move into talking about specific marketing tactics that make sense after the launch. And so maybe I'll have Paulette Kennedy lead us off this time if you're comfortable with that. Like, what do you do after the launch in terms of specific things?
One of the things that I did with this last launch that I felt was kind of successful, and true, I did it for like the first 2 weeks after launch, so I didn't continue it, but I will probably pick it up again at some point. I did themed reels. They were cooking videos that were 1950s recipes, and it was really fun. And I think when it comes to social media marketing, especially, you want to do something that kind of stands out and that's unique. And I decided to do something a little bit different. Instead of just like getting on a reel and talking about my book the whole time, I featured recipes that my main character, Loretta, might have made as a housewife in the 1950s. And those reels got a lot of views. So that was something specific that I did. Another thing is with my newsletter, I tend to do I do giveaways with my newsletter, but I feature author friends. And so I rotate through and I feature different books every month. And a lot of the time, my giveaways will have my book in them, but it'll also have my author friends' books in them as well. So they're getting books that are kind of adjacent to what I write, and it's introducing them to new authors. And they're always very well. I have like an open rate of 60 to 70% on my newsletters, depending on the month. And so I spend most of my marketing energy on my newsletter. I would say probably at least 30% to 40% of my month is spent like planning my newsletter and what I'm going to put in my newsletter. And that has paid off for me, I think, especially for big things with like cover reveals and launch week and whatnot. I do see it move the needle a little bit. So that would be the advice that I would give to authors is just build your mailing list, build your subscription list, your readers, because they're volunteering to stay there. They want to be there. They want to hear from you. If they didn't, they would unsubscribe, and people do unsubscribe. That's just part of having a newsletter. But there are some giveaways that I've done post-launch, grouped with other authors, some really big ones. Heather Saddlemeyer does a really good group, and I have gained subscribers for that. But again, with your newsletter, if what you're producing in your newsletter isn't necessarily appealing, then those people will leave. So it's like you have to keep them once you get them. And so that you keep them by offering them something unique. And that, I think, has been the biggest thing for me, is just finding something unique, a unique angle to continue to market and talk about your book without belaboring the whole process. Because I used to just like make a graphic on Canva and just throw it up on my socials. And I still do that sometimes too, because I think that's important for visibility. But I think relating to your audience is even more important, especially when it comes to social media and newsletters.
It's a great
I
example.
think a lot of what you're talking about is about adding value, providing value to your readers. So when you're giving things away, when you're introducing them, when you're making funny recipes, that's all social content that's adding value to your community. So I definitely hear you there. I had a question for you about your newsletter, if you don't mind, because
Sure.
Since you spend so much time on it, do you cull your list? If people who are not engaged, you drop them off and try to keep it a really high engagement list, or do you kind of keep them on because every person has the potential to be a reader at some point?
I keep them on just because I know how Google can be with putting things into spam. And if they only open it once or interact with it once, that will bring it back out of spam and they're more likely to see it the next month. So I don't go through and actively cull people. Um, I would say the thing that I do is like I get a lot of emails like in response to my newsletter posts whenever I send them out. Like I'll make sure I respond to those readers who take the time to email me. And it's that whole thing of making people feel seen, making people feel special because they are special. I mean, without every single one of our readers, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be able to do what we do. So I really try to keep that attitude in mind that they don't have to be here, they want to be here, and that's a huge thing to be grateful for.
Great. I have a couple of things to add here. Newsletters. So I tell the people in my marketing class that if you're going to do one thing as an author, one marketing tactic, your author newsletter is it. So whether it's an author newsletter or a Substack, it's actually funny because I tell them that social media is optional, but the newsletter is not. So interestingly, I take the perspective that social media, you can choose whether or not to do, but your newsletter as an author, I really, really want you to go get one and put the time in. And that's the number one tactic that has been proven to pay off for authors over time. So 100% agree with you. Really glad you said that, Paulette. And I do some things in my newsletter to try and drive engagement where I do giveaways of other authors' books. So my newsletter list at this point, my author newsletter list is about 8,500 subscribers. And I've built that through a combination of group giveaways with other authors, through the sign up, through the pop-ups on my website, through different things. A lot of them came from giveaways. And one of the things I do is monthly, I do a giveaway of another author's book, which lets me feature that book and talk about that book and show my own review and what my experience of reading that book was. And then I have a one-click to enter, where they don't have to go fill in a form or anything. They just have to click on a link and I will put them in the giveaway for that book. And that helps me get a very high click and engagement rate on my newsletters because people just have to do one click. But for Google, it shows that people actually clicked on something in my newsletter and interacted with them. And then I just take that list. It basically throws them into a group. And I take that group of, let's say 200 authors who clicked on the link, 200 readers who clicked on the link, and I choose my giveaway person from that. So that's one way that I've been able to try and drive up engagement. And then I had another example from a different author, and I bet you know her, Paulette. Do you know Carrie? I'm going to say her name wrong. Carrie Chaput, Chaput. She also writes historical fiction. Chaput. She's lovely. I'm saying her name wrong. Chaput. Okay. So similar to your example of finding the recipes and finding that value where you're going to bring something that engages your audience. She did a whole series, I believe she's still doing it, on like famous women and unsung female heroines in history. And she puts them up on TikTok, and like her books are about unsung female heroines in history, but she's done a whole series on other ones, all the ones she finds researching who she's not written a book about yet. But it's a great way to engage with people who are interested in that topic, who then might be interested in her books because she writes about unsung female heroines in history. And so I think that's a really equivalent thing to your recipe thing, where you're engaging people in a topic area that's of interest to you. And it's fun for her, I think, to do that because she's already doing the research. She's already finding these. So maybe we'll have her on someday to talk about it. But I thought that was another interesting example of exactly what you're talking about.
That's hilarious you thought of Carrie, because when Paulette was talking about her recipes, Carrie popped to mind immediately because of that series that she does about the human history. So if you haven't checked out Carrie's books, go check them out, y'all.
Awesome. Paulette, do you want to add anything else on this topic of marketing tactics? I think we wanted, for example, to talk about advertising, which is something that you have more experience with as an indie author. And I'm guessing that Paulette Kennedy probably hasn't done much advertising because you're with a big publisher. Would that be a good guess, that you probably haven't done much there?
No, I haven't done a lot of paid advertising. I do occasionally run ads on Instagram. That's been about the extent of like my paid, apart from like joining like the big marketing, like giveaway type group marketing emails. I've done that before and paid for it, but yeah, not really.
Yeah, so it's a good example of it's different with a big publisher where they control things and it's up to them versus an indie or smaller publisher. But Paulette Stout, I know you have done advertising, and it's something that's definitely the after the launch, right? That you
like for me, it's really a very close correlation between when the ads are running and when they're not running, what I'm selling. I mean, there's just so many books published a month, and especially on Amazon where they favor recency. in terms of their algorithmic. They give you a boost for like the first month, and then you kind of hit the Amazon cliff that people talk about, once that month is out, because they're on to the new people. So I find paid advertising. I use Facebook ads. I have used Amazon at other times. Some books work well in both. Some work better for Amazon, some for others. I've done a little dabbled in BookBub a little bit, but I find that the more you kind of test and you see what works. I'm getting some help from the amazing Heidi McIntyre. Look her up, y'all. She's amazing. Helping me a little bit with my ads, and she's all into the data. And it's so interesting how much there are certain ways you can target and then you can't target, but apparently the image you use on your ads is really critically important to finding the right people, because Facebook uses the image very heavily in their targeting. So having that right image, having some copy that tells the story. There's I think you've heard of people, these universal fantasies, these common ways of themes of books that are very relatable and universal. So it's fighting against the odds, or lost loves, or just different types of themes. And if you can key on those in your advertising, it makes it very relatable to people. You can experiment with your graphics if you have the book image, if you have a people, if you have words on your picture, if you don't have words on your picture, if you have just testing. And it's such a sophisticated algorithm. There are a lot of different schools and classes you can take about this, but there's just no substitute for just getting out there and putting your book out and trying, because no matter what you hear online or from us, you don't know what's going to work for you in your book, in your genre, in your packaging, in your goals. Like, everything is different. So it's super sucky to hear, go try it and see how it goes. But that's a big answer for some of this post-launch strategies is, dabble in advertising and see what works for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think with both Facebook and Amazon pay-per-click ads, you really can't know what ad's going to perform until you try it. Like I actually just had a conversation with another author who was looking at BookBub ads, and those can actually scale pretty fast on the cost. So I always caution people with BookBub ads. And she was thinking that she had this perfect ad. She had this one, and she sent it to me to ask what I thought of her ad, right? Like, this is my picture. This is my copy. I'm going to run with this on BookBub and put money against it. What do you think? And my answer to her was, no. You're going to run with 10 ads and find out which one works. You do not know. There is no way to guess up front. And I did BookBub ads myself. And interestingly, it was not the ones that I thought were the best that best performed. It was completely the ones I thought were the suckiest that actually did the best and had the most clicks and performed the best. And with BookBub, you can target specific authors' followings. And it was interesting that it wasn't the authors who'd given me blurbs who had similar books. There was actually a different set of authors that ended up performing better for me when I targeted them. It tended to be lesser known debut authors. And I couldn't see that coming before I tried it. I would have thought that the author who gave me a blurb, that I have an ad that says, Rochelle Weinstein says this book is awesome, and I target Rochelle Weinstein's followers, logically, you'd think that ad would play well. No, it was terrible. Rochelle Weinstein's followers love Rochelle Weinstein. It doesn't mean they want to hear from anybody else. And so it was really interesting that I would have guessed it all wrong. And so I think that's, I 100% agree. And I don't know if it is unfortunate, because you do not have to spend a ton of money to test. You do not have to go spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars. You can test with very low amounts of money to see which creatives, which ads, which targeting works for you. And that's true for BookBub. It's true for Facebook. It's true for Amazon ads. And so, yeah, I think that message is a very important one that says, don't think you can know the answer up front. And obviously, you can't know the answer before you publish. So this is something you're going to work on refining after your book is out the door. And it's a unique opportunity after your book is out the door.
Yeah, and the other piece of this is that just because something works for a point in time doesn't mean it'll continue working indefinitely that way. All these things have cycles, and you'll have an ad or something that will work really well, then it'll just tank. You'll need to replace it. So it is something that needs some husbandry as you go along, keeping track of it a little bit, and just understand the picadillos, like you said. BookBub and Facebook will spend the money. You give them money, they will spend it. Whereas Amazon, you might have trouble spending your money because your strategies aren't right, your bids aren't right, you're targeting the wrong people. It's a really competitive time of year, all those types of things. I think also, just briefly in terms of marketing, I don't think we have it on our list today, but seasonality is also really important too to keep in mind for when your book is launching and how much competition is going on in the marketplace at that time for advertising, because that can make your ads more or less effective.
And I have a resource tip for advertising. So I was at the 20 Books to 50K, the 20 Books conference last November, and they had a whole track on advertising where authors were sharing in great detail, like the exact creative and the exact ads they ran and what worked and what didn't and what they learned along the way. And all of the presentations are online on YouTube from last year if you want to watch some of that, and they're all free on the 20 Books account. And if you're considering going to this year's conference, if you're trying to go deep on advertising, that would be a good conference to go to the conference now called Author Nation, because I expect it'll have a similar deep dive on advertising type topics coming from an indie perspective, right? That's an indie conference. Some small publisher authors go, maybe less relevant if you're a big publisher author who doesn't have control of that. But if you're an indie author and you want to go deep and learn like what worked for other authors on ads, what struck me in the sessions I attended, there was one with an author, sorry, I can't remember his name right now, who was running like, oh my God, I think he was spending $100,000 a month on ads. And his ads were insanely simple. I'll see if I can find the name and put it in the link to the YouTube, a video, specific video I'm talking about. His ads were insanely simple. He literally had like a one image of a car blowing up, and it said, if you love Janet Ivanovic, this is your next read. That was it. That was the entire ad. And it worked incredibly well, because if you love Janet Ivanovic, you love the fact that there's always a car that blows up in a Janet Ivanovic novel. And here you're being told that there's someone else you can read who's not Janet Ivanovic who will give you that same experience. And so that was like his number one ad that he used as an example. And what struck me in his and all the other sessions was how insanely simple those ads were. It was one very attention grabbing image and less than 10 words of text. Okay, so we're almost at the end of our time here. And I think the other one we wanted to touch on is retailer and library outreach. Is there anything we can share around what makes sense after the launch in terms of working with retailers, bookstores, libraries, any other kind of outlets? I mean, Paulette Stout, you want to lead us off? Do you have anything to share in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's if you're on the indie side, you do a lot of your sales online. Each retailer has a team, or usually a person, who is in charge of their marketing promotion. So it'd be a good to kind of, learn who that person is, to get in touch with them so that you can say, hey, tell me about your book. You can consider me for promotions you have going on. I worked with the people at Direct to Digital a couple of years ago to do a group carousel that they put up on Smashwords on the homepage for Women's Fiction Day, and we had a whole bunch of women's fiction authors. So they're interested in hearing from authors and working with authors. So on the online side, for sure, and then on the local side,
I just had a question. What is a retailer? Just for people who don't understand, when you say the
sure,
retailers,
so that would
marketing
be
people.
Yeah, I mean that would be Amazon, Apple, Draft to Digital, Kobo, places that sell books, Barnes and Noble, they have retailers too. And, around the globe, I'm sure, other things. So I think that there are ways to do it at a larger scale like that, and also at a local scale. Like I can sign at my local bookstore, just reaching out to bookstores one by one. Sometimes that you can get some sell through there. I'm not sure, Paulette, what your thoughts are on either of those.
Well, I think a lot of it with retailers and such depends. BookBub, I feel like, is a good way to kind of leverage a little bit of your advertising dollars with the booksellers and Amazon ads too. I unfortunately not had as much luck with independent bookstores in my area being willing to carry my book. That's partially because of who publishes me. But I do know that independent bookstores will order books. And so I try to still build a relationship with independent bookstores. And I love bookstores myself, and libraries as well. One of the things that I love about the library system is like getting those reviews with Booklist and such really helps get you visible with libraries. And they tend to like sending like people in your street team or people that like to their library to request your book and such. That's a huge help for gaining more exposure for your books. I love libraries. I'm very passionate about them and want to do more events at libraries too, which I think that's a good entry point for a lot of authors who maybe don't have as much access to retailers, especially like in their hometown. If you're in a smaller town, in an area that doesn't have that has a little bit of a book desert going on. Having an access to a library or having those online retailers where you can, buy ads and such, more readers, it's really beneficial.
And I think Paulette Stout, you've had success also with like face-to-face events, like local fairs or face-to-face selling events. You want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, what I ended up doing is because, just like Paulette was saying, I hadn't had as much success with smaller bookstores, and you can read lots of articles about the challenges they have, and they really need high volume books that will turn over a lot to kind of keep them going. So smaller authors are sometimes less profitable for them. So I've kind of taken the approach where I do like in-person book selling at craft fairs, holiday fairs, associate book festivals, like things like that, where I can be face to face with readers and have the conversation, and often sell way more books in one day than you probably would sell in a year at a local bookstore who really needs you to be driving to their storefront to make a profit.
Do you ever, Paulette Kennedy, do you ever do local fairs of any type?
I've been to a few book festivals. I was at the San Diego Books last year on my agent's invitation, and that was, however, the bookstore couldn't get my books in stock, so I just signed bookmarks. So it's like when you get lemons, you make lemonade, right? So I just signed bookmarks and gave them to people who came up to the signing table. And then whenever I was at H&S, they had a room and my books were there to buy. I have like local craft fairs, festivals that are super local to my area, but something interesting that I might look into. It sounds like fun.
Yeah, and I think circling back to the libraries, like you were saying, is like, reaching out for author talks. Lots of libraries will do author talks in person and virtual, and they'll often have a book group, or you'll be able to sell on site. So there's lots of other ways to engage with the libraries. And oftentimes when I've done talks at libraries, they will then, in advance of me coming, they will add the books to their collection. So libraries are, kind of underfunded and understaffed. So sometimes when you email, you don't hear back from them. But if, I would suggest pick one of these channels, libraries, retail, in person, whatever, and kind of give it a go. You don't have to do all the things, like we said in the last episode. You just choose what you think you're comfortable with. Lainey, I don't know what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, totally. I'm of the don't do all the things, and don't do all the things on social media if you hate it. Like, I hate seeing the authors put all their creative energy into social media because someone told them they have to. And the reality is, like, I do a wonderful compare for my class where I show them my results on social media versus my newsletter. And what I show them is that 90 days of posting on Instagram, and I have about 8,500 followers on Instagram, 90 days of posting on Instagram, and think about the energy that goes into 90 days of posts. So how many times do I post in 90 days? How many days do I put it on my story? Is equivalent to sending one newsletter. I get the same interaction and response and number of clicks and number of purchases from sending one newsletter than I do from 90 days of participation on Instagram. And my list's about the same size, 8,500 in both cases. So if you're going to go put your energy somewhere, think about the amount of energy that goes into 90 days of Instagram versus one newsletter. For goodness sakes, get your author newsletter up and running. It's your number one marketing tactic. Go get on it, folks. So that's why you heard me say that earlier. I just want to ask, I think my last question, and then I really want to hear more about Paulette's latest release. My last question is there anything we haven't talked about here that you wanted to talk about today, either Let or Paulette?
I'll let Paulette go first on that one. She's our lovely guest.
Well, one of the things that I'll just say, it goes back to that whole community thing. It's like, things forward. We're all in this together, and the publishing community is small, and people that are just coming up might be future best-selling authors. And so build those relationships and keep your circle, and, reach out. Another thing that has worked for me too, especially with getting reviews, is or like online virtual book tours improved. That really helps has helped introduce me to Bookstagram accounts and people like that who have become networks that I can reach out to for future books too, like for cover rules and things like that. They're always happy to help with events like that to help boost your future work. So it's all about like building relationships now and paying it forward.
Yeah, that's a great thing. I think that continuing to keep your book kind of out in the conversations, you like the people sometimes do book tours post launch also, not all bookstagrammers and influencers are interested in books. They like the newness of it, but there are those that will, so you can pursue those. I've also done kind of review pushes to try to get more book reviews on, and there's lots of different companies that do that will sometimes work with you out of the book launch cycle. The only one thing that we didn't mention in terms of a post-launch strategy is just scheduling periodic, book sales or price reductions, and then working with different newsletters to, send them out. And you can see, like, I typically, because my books are, women's fiction, I like to work with people who actually have that category. Not all newsletters have that category, but depending on your genre, there are a lot of newsletters that will, you can send out to different communities, and if your book is 99 cents or free or whatever for a very limited amount of time, that's a nice way to kind of spike the interest back into your book. And even when your price goes back up, sometimes you get some long tail sales out of like an initial price reduction.
That's a good point. And picking up on what Paulette Kennedy said, if I could go back in time and tell authors who are early in their author career one thing, it's that you're not in competition with other authors. I see this as a common mistake that authors very early on, before they're published, before they're really part of the author community, they misunderstand how this works and they think that they're in competition. And just that mindset there will screw with your head and mess up your author career. And so you just need to let that go really early on. You are never in competition with other authors. We might even do a whole episode about this, but like, it's just a really important mindset to like sweep it out your head, get rid of that, reset. This is all about community and helping each other, and you will have an entirely different experience as an author through your career. I have two questions for you, Paulette Kennedy. But before I do that, let me just point out that if you're listening to this, especially on the audio version, and you're going, oh my goodness, wait, we mentioned like this Right Hive thing, and we mentioned like Paulette had someone really good for marketing and for advertising, and like Lainey mentioned this other thing. We have the full transcript on the website, and we will have links to every resource we mentioned. So if we mention someone that we think is helpful, we will put the link to where you can find them and connect with them. And you can find all of that at bestofbookmarketing.com. So don't panic if you missed something and you're trying to find it. You can also always send us a message, but we go through and we put all of that on the episode page on the website. And so I will wrap up with two questions for Paulette Kennedy. The first one is, you mentioned one resource, Right Hive. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I know it's something you said you were passionate about, and you've worked with them and you found it to be a great resource.
Yes, Right Hive is a wonderful community, and it's all volunteer. Their conference is completely here. It's free. They put it on every year. I've also been touring their mentor. That's it's been really beneficial to a lot of newer authors and authors that are between agents or who want to be independently published. There are lots of resources. There's lots of like critique groups and things on their Discord. You just go to their website, righthive.com. You will find all kinds of information. There are all kinds of resources on their YouTube channel too. They record all panels at their conference up for the public on YouTube. So there are just so many different avenues through Right Hive that you can get to know other authors, and you can form critique groups and also just learn more about like marketing and advertising your books after you're published.
Awesome. And my last question for you is, please tell us about your last release and your next release, because there's people listening who are like, I don't know Paulette Kennedy. You write historical fiction. Tell us more. Tell us more about your books.
Yes, so my last book, which came out in March, is The Devil and Mrs. Davenport, and is about a 1950s wife who develops psychic abilities after a short illness, and it's kind of a suspense thriller, a little bit of a domestic thriller. And then my next book doesn't have a title yet, but it's in production. I just finished with developmental edits, and it is set in the 1920s. All my work is historical. I kind of jump around between eras because I get bored. But it is about a woman who goes to her great aunt's caregiver And while she's there, her great aunt is an artist, and she discovers that her aunt's paintings are haunted and work as portals to the past. And so she can go back in time and kind of see what her aunt's life was like before when she was a young woman. And there are lots of fun things going on with that book. And there's also a heavy romantic subplot with that one.
That sounds like the juiciest thing ever. Y'all, The Double Mrs. Davenport was ridiculously amazing. Just like phenomenal. Go read it. I'm so excited for this book. I'm just go get it done already.
And I'm guessing, Paulette, after this conversation,
you,
Paulette
Paulette.
Kennedy, I actually have The Devil and Mrs. Davenport on my iPad, and I'm so backed up on my review requests that I have, blurb requests from other authors, that I have to finish all those before I can read the books I want to read, like that. I really want to read it, but I can't. I have to finish my blurb requests first. So I always feel like I'm doing homework, right? I try to support other authors, and I've got all these books, and so I have to prioritize those first, so I meet their deadlines. But I'm really looking forward to it. It's on my iPad. I bought it the day it came out. So, Paulette, I am going to guess, Kennedy, that the best way, if people want to know about that new book when it comes out, find out when it gets a title, is to follow you on your newsletter. Would be to sign up for your newsletter would be the best thing for them, right? There we go.
Yes, and you can find my newsletter on my website, so paulettekennedy.com. And then you can also find me on social media at pkennedywrites. That's my handle on Instagram. So.
Perfect. Well, I think we've reached the top of the hour. I think it's been another action-packed episode with lots of good tips. Like I said, all the notes are on the website at bestofbookmarketing.com. Any last comments from either Paulette before we wrap up?
Love this topic, and we've got some really great episodes coming up, so keep a lookout for the future episodes of the Best of Book Marketing.
Yes. And we have a newsletter too. So on the website, sign up for our newsletter, because that's how you'll hear each time a new episode comes out and what resources are available from each one. Okay, Paulette Kennedy,
so much,
we appreciate you. Yeah.
Yay.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to be here.